In a world obsessed with conformity, the rare mind is born not through rebellion, but through silent observation. Not louder, just quieter. Not more visible, just deeper. The rarest minds are not those who shout to be different, but those who silently watch the chaos, wondering why no one else is questioning it. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But for the rarest minds, this isn't a privilege, it's a burden they were born carrying. They see too much, feel too much, notice what others are conditioned to ignore. And so, from the very beginning, they're misunderstood. Not because they lack intelligence, but because their intelligence bends inward, toward complexity, contradiction, and truth that has no language. They are the ones who sit in rooms full of noise, feeling like strangers in a world built on surface-level small talk. They crave meaning, not distraction, depth, not validation. And most of all, they crave honesty. But how does the world treat such a mind? It doesn't admire it. It pathologizes it. You're too intense. You think too much. You're too sensitive. These are not criticisms. They're confessions. Confessions from a culture terrified of introspection. Because a rare mind forces others to confront what they've been avoiding. It disrupts the social illusion. It questions the scripts. It rejects the masks. And when you reject the mask, people will call you dangerous, not because you are, but because your honesty threatens the lie they live in. So the rarest minds learn early. To survive, they must adapt. To be heard, they must translate their depths into digestible bits. To connect, they must abandon pieces of themselves. And that's where the first wound begins. They begin to split. A part of them learns to perform, to become the good student, the productive employee, the respectful child. But another part, the real self, quietly withers beneath the weight of unspoken truth. They know something is wrong, not with them, but with the way the world is designed. Because while others are chasing popularity, they're chasing authenticity. While others are numbing themselves with noise, they're asking, what's underneath all this? And while others are adapting to belong, the rare mind is silently suffocating in rooms where truth is unwelcome. They begin to feel alien, not just socially, but spiritually, existentially. It's not loneliness, it's exile. But here's the secret. That exile is sacred, because it leads to individuation. Carl Jung believed that the most important process of psychological development was individuation, the journey of becoming who you truly are, apart from the expectations of society, family, and ego. And that journey always begins with exile, with realizing that you don't belong in the world as it is. But here's the cost. To walk that path, you must be willing to let go of who you were trained to be. The rare mind feels this earlier than most. They sense the falseness in their roles, the emptiness in their achievements, the hollowness in their success. Because they weren't made to succeed in the traditional sense, they were made to see through it. And so they begin their descent, not into madness, but into meaning. They dive into books no one else reads. They ask questions no one wants to answer. They challenge ideas that others blindly accept. And in that darkness, they begin to find light. Not external light, not approval, but internal clarity. They learn to be alone without being lonely, to feel deeply without needing permission, to speak the truth without apology. They become, as Jung would say, a light to themselves, not because they were born with it, but because they were willing to descend into their own depths to find it. This is the first sign, not a skill, not an achievement, but a state of being. You are not like the others, and you've always known. Not better, not worse, just rare. And in a world that profits from conformity, that rarity is seen as a threat. But in reality, it's the beginning of something sacred, something no one else can see, but you were born to become. We enter now into the second phase of the journey, a space far more elusive and unnerving than the one before. If the first segment revealed that the rarest minds are those attuned to deeper frequencies of the human condition, then this part explores the cost of such awareness, the cost of clarity, the price of consciousness. Carl Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. But rare minds, they stop running. They stare directly into the black waters of the unconscious, and they wait." These are the people who are no longer distracted by the world's noise, the ones who've started noticing how much of life is performance, persona, and projection. They begin to wonder, if I remove every borrowed identity, every mask I wear for safety, what's left of me? What do I really see when no one's watching? This segment is about the mirror with no reflection, the strange and isolating moment when the rare mind detaches from societal roles and begins its descent into authentic being. Not polished, not presentable, but real. You see through people so clearly, it's painful. You don't just notice people's behavior, you feel their motives. You catch the micro-expressions, the hesitations in their voice, the strange silences where a truth should be. While others are swept away by charm or status, you sit still, quietly watching the fractures behind the facade. You see the lonely behind the loud, the insecure behind the aggressive, the abandoned behind the overly giving. But this gift comes with a burden. You often feel alien, like you're in a theater where everyone has agreed to suspend disbelief, but you can't unsee the props, the sweat under the makeup, the shaking hands behind the mask. You see people not just as they present themselves, but as they are, and sometimes you wish you didn't. You've let go of most labels because they feel limiting. You used to call yourself things, you used to belong to groups. You used to need labels to feel like you had a place in the world. But now every label feels like a costume. You're not this or that. You're something in between, something shifting. You no longer care to argue about ideologies, belief systems, or the morality wars people trap themselves in. You've realized that reality is fluid, language is flawed, and you are not reducible. And in letting go of labels, you've gained something else, a strange inner freedom. But it's also isolating, because now you don't quite fit anywhere, not fully, and that dissonance can sometimes feel like exile. Silence has become a language you understand. There's a kind of sacredness in silence that most people fear. They fill it with noise, constant conversation, distraction, entertainment, because silence threatens to reveal what they're running from. But not you. Silence speaks to you in a language few understand. It tells you things words never could. It teaches you to sit in uncertainty. It helps you listen to yourself, to life, to the unspeakable currents between people. And in that silence, something ancient stirs. A kind of knowing that bypasses intellect and settles straight into your bones. A truth that has no proof, but is undeniably real. People project onto you what they don't understand in themselves. The more you differentiate yourself from the herd, the more you become a screen onto which others project their fears, desires, and insecurities. If someone has unresolved issues with control, your independence will be interpreted as rebellion. If someone is insecure, your silence becomes arrogance. If they fear intimacy, your insight becomes threat. You become a mirror they didn't ask for, and sometimes they'll break the mirror just to avoid seeing their own reflection. But you've learned not to take it personally, not anymore. You've learned that projection is not about you. It's about what they cannot hold within themselves. Still, it's exhausting to be constantly misunderstood, to be cast in roles you didn't audition for. But you keep walking, because your path is not about being liked, it's about being true. You have a relationship with the invisible. Most people believe only what they can see, touch, or measure. But you've always sensed something more, something deeper moving beneath the surface of the visible world. You feel energies shift when people walk into a room. You sense connections before words are spoken. You feel the mood of a place, the tension in a conversation, the sadness no one speaks about. It's not mystical or magical, it's perception unclouded by distraction. You've learned to read between the lines, not just of books, but of people, of spaces, of life. And while this sensitivity can be overwhelming, it's also your compass. It tells you where truth lives. It guides you toward what's real. You struggle with normal goals because they feel hollow. Climbing the corporate ladder, buying the house, building the brand. These goals, while not inherently wrong, often feel lifeless. Not because they're bad, but because they're borrowed. You've noticed how much of what people chase is driven by fear. Fear of being left behind, of being unimportant, of being nobody. And you've asked the rarest question of all: what do I actually want? That question has no easy answer, but asking it separates you from the crowd. It puts you on a different timeline, one where success is measured not in status, but in alignment. You no longer chase, you seek, and that changes everything. Your suffering has made you empathetic, not bitter. Most people harden after pain. They become cynical, guarded, sharp-edged. But not you. Your wounds did something different. They broke you open. They deepened your compassion. They made you more attuned to the quiet pain in others. They softened your judgments. You don't just hear people now, you feel them. You've become a safe space for others, not because you're perfect, but because you've been to hell and came back with a map. And while that kind of openness can be exhausting, it's also holy. Because in a world that teaches us to close, you've remained open, vulnerable, awake. You're willing to be alone if it means being whole. Rare minds are often lonely, but not because they can't be with people. It's because they can't be half with people. You've tried small talk. You've tried dimming your light. You've tried being what others expect, and it felt like betrayal. So now you choose solitude over self-abandonment. You walk alone not out of pride, but out of necessity, because wholeness requires it, because your soul is too vast to be caged by convention. You've come to terms with the fact that not everyone will get you, and that's okay. Because the rarest minds, they don't need to be seen by everyone, just by the few who see through. There is a haunting paradox that comes with deep insight. The more clearly you see the world, the more estranged from it you often feel. It starts subtly. At first, the rare mind is simply curious, observant. They notice the little inconsistencies that most brush off. The social masks, the performative kindness, the unspoken rules everyone obeys but no one questions. At dinner tables, in boardrooms, in friendships, they begin to feel something peculiar, a quiet distance, a silent divide, not because they feel superior, but because they feel overwhelmed by what most are content to ignore. This is the curse of rare perception. You begin to notice the falseness in things, the scripted nature of most interactions, the way language is used to hide truth more than reveal it, the way people lie, not just to others, but to themselves, with conviction. You see this and feel the weight of it. The conversations you once found stimulating now feel hollow. The games people play seem childish. The world, once vivid and magnetic, becomes a shadow play. And in that realization, the rare mind begins to withdraw. But here's the paradox. Isolation doesn't begin with distance from others. It begins with deeper closeness to truth. When you awaken to deeper truths, loneliness often follows. Because truth, in its rawest form, doesn't integrate easily into the world. It doesn't fit neatly into social norms, dinner party small talk, or team building exercises. It disrupts things. And so, the rare mind finds itself caught in a bind. Share what they see and risk being misunderstood, alienated, or even mocked. Or stay silent and preserve connection at the cost of authenticity. This is how many rare minds become quiet. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they've learned most aren't ready to hear it. Not out of arrogance, but protection of self and others. Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." And so, the rare mind begins to live in translation, constantly editing, simplifying, diluting what they really see, just to stay legible to others. They smile when they're confused, nod when they disagree, soften their language, mute their metaphors, avoid the deep end of the pool because no one else wants to swim there. And yet, they crave it. The desire for genuine connection never fades, but the avenues to it grow narrower. Most rare minds try, at some point, to shrink themselves, to fit. They study the rules, mimic the rhythms, wear the uniform of normality. They try to just be chill, to go with the flow, to not ask so many questions. But the facade always cracks, because depth cannot be faked. It can be buried, temporarily, but it always returns. And so the rare mind oscillates between two poles, the pain of being unseen versus the pain of hiding who they are. It is an exhausting dilemma, and one not easily resolved. This is why many rare minds find solace in solitude, in books, in nature, in inner monologue. Because in solitude, they do not have to translate themselves. They can think in complexity, feel in paradox, and speak in symbols without being asked to simplify. But even solitude has its limits, because we are relational creatures. We seek mirrors, we seek resonance. Even the most self-reliant among us eventually hungers for connection that doesn't require a mask. And sometimes they find it. Rare minds recognize each other, not by surface traits, but by energetic frequency. A look, a phrase, a silence held just long enough. An unspoken understanding that says, "I see you, I feel this too." These moments are rare, but unforgettable. They restore something ancient in the psyche, the archetype of kinship, the tribe of minds who don't belong everywhere, but deeply belong to each other. Yet even among rare minds, isolation lingers, because each sees a different facet of the truth. Each carries a slightly different map of the world, and sometimes those maps don't align perfectly. But still, they try, because it's worth it. Psychologically, this isolation can be a crucible. When left unprocessed, it turns into despair, nihilism, even madness. But when consciously embraced, it becomes a rite of passage. This is the Jungian initiation into individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, not who the world asked you to be. Individuation demands solitude, because in solitude the ego softens and the self emerges, the deeper, eternal self that holds your truest voice, the part of you that is not performative, not strategic, but pure. And so the rare mind must learn to navigate isolation not as a punishment, but as a sacred space, a temple, a wilderness. In this wilderness, you meet your shadow,
all the parts of you that you disowned in order to fit in. The too intense, too sensitive, too weird parts. You call them back, you reintegrate, and in doing so, you become whole. This process is painful. It involves mourning the loss of easy belonging, mourning the innocence of not knowing, mourning the dream that someday someone would just get you completely. But it is also liberating, because you stop waiting for permission to be yourself. You begin to create your own language, your own rituals, your own rhythms. You begin to enjoy your own company, not as a consolation, but as a choice. You learn that it is better to be alone in truth than connected in falseness. And ironically, this is when the world begins to open back up. Because you are no longer approaching it with neediness. You are no longer shrinking yourself to belong. You are simply offering your truth calmly and letting the right people find it. This is where the rare mind begins to lead, not in the traditional sense of power, but in the energetic sense of presence. Others feel something in you, a steadiness, a clarity, a depth, and it inspires them. It calls them deeper into themselves. But you no longer need them to follow, because your value is no longer tied to recognition. You are not performing depth, you are being it. This is individuation. This is spiritual maturity. And it was forged not in crowds, but in solitude, not in praise, but in quiet knowing. So if you are a rare mind and you feel the ache of isolation, know this: you are not broken, you are not lost. You are simply seeing things others have not yet seen. And while that may cost you belonging for a time, it will return tenfold with those who can truly meet you. But first, you must meet yourself, fully, honestly, quietly. And in that sacred meeting, you will find not just insight, but peace. In a world obsessed with illusions, where masks are praised, filters are currency, and pretending a survival, there exists a rare kind of mind that simply refuses to lie to itself. This segment is about those individuals who cannot and will not betray the voice of truth inside them, no matter how inconvenient or isolating that truth may be. Carl Jung called this confrontation the battle with one's own shadow. But to the rarest minds, it is not just a battle, it is the only way to truly exist. Let us now enter the realm of internal honesty, a place where the mirror doesn't flatter you, but instead dares you to see everything that society hopes you'll ignore.
Rare minds have a strange obsession: truth. Not just objective truth in the external world, but inner psychological truth. The quiet and often painful realizations about their own motives, wounds, and patterns. This makes them uncomfortable to be around, not because they harm others, but because their honesty disturbs illusions. They refuse to play roles. They notice when they're people-pleasing. They admit when they're projecting. And they catch themselves in self-deception faster than others catch them in a lie. This radical clarity often leads them to feel emotionally alone, even among friends, because not everyone wants that level of depth. But over time, what feels like isolation becomes power. The rarest minds transform loneliness into self-anchoring. They realize that being alone with the truth is far better than being surrounded by lies that feel good. Most people cope by numbing. Alcohol, constant entertainment, overwork, compulsive productivity, shallow socializing. Rare minds try these too, for a while. But something inside them breaks when they do it for too long. Their unconscious screams louder than their distractions. Carl Jung believed that the unconscious seeks wholeness, not comfort. And rare individuals live this reality. They feel the psychological tension of what's unhealed, unacknowledged, or suppressed.
It keeps them up at night. It pulls them out of shallow pleasures. It whispers in dreams. And so they stop numbing, not out of moral superiority, but because it simply doesn't work for them. They would rather sit in silence with their wounds than keep anesthetizing themselves. And in doing so, they develop emotional resilience most never touch. Rare minds do something astonishing. They become intimate with the parts of themselves that others run from. Rage, envy, shame, lust, arrogance, despair. They examine it all. They don't justify it, but they no longer deny it. This is what Jung meant by owning the shadow. It doesn't mean acting out dark impulses. It means acknowledging them, learning from them, and integrating their energy in conscious ways. Where others are fragmented, splitting off good and bad parts, rare minds seek unity. They know that their shadow is not a curse, but a portal, a door to depth, authenticity, and psychological freedom. And as they descend into their darkness, they rise in wholeness. Part of waking up means mourning. Rare individuals don't just grow into themselves, they shed identities. They lose versions of themselves that were never real to begin with. The obedient child, the high-achieving perfectionist, the strong one, the silent one, the savior, the good girl, the golden boy. They begin to realize these roles were assigned by wounded systems, families, cultures, schools. And as they untangle from these scripts, a wave of grief hits. Because for a long time, they believed these roles were love, that being accepted meant being good, that their value depended on performance. Letting this go is not just freedom, it's heartbreak. But only by grieving can they resurrect as who they truly are, not the version others molded, but the one that has always existed under the mask. To feel deeply is not glamorous. Rare minds often feel too much. A single look can break them. A memory can flood them. Injustice can ruin their day. They are emotionally porous, like they've been skinned open and walk through the world with no armor. This makes them seem sensitive, dramatic, or even weak to others. But in reality, they're navigating a level of emotional data that most people avoid. And over time, this emotional depth becomes their greatest source of insight. They understand others with terrifying accuracy. They notice subtle shifts in tone, body language, and energy. And they use this sensitivity not for control, but for connection, healing, and creative expression. What once a burden becomes their superpower. At some point, rare minds realize they've changed too much to keep pretending. Their conversations shift. Small talk exhausts them. Gossip disgusts them. They no longer know how to fake interest in things they find hollow. They start speaking in metaphors, psychological language, archetypes, and dreams. And because of this, they often feel misunderstood. But slowly, this language becomes their compass. They write, they create, they mentor, they heal. And eventually, they attract others who speak the same inner dialect. The rarest minds don't need everyone to understand them, just a few who truly do. Peace is expensive. It costs relationships, comfort, illusions, and even identity. But rare individuals are willing to pay it, because they know there is no true peace without inner alignment. They stop negotiating with their truth. They stop diluting their needs. They stop managing other people's perceptions. And while this makes their world smaller, it makes their soul lighter. They may lose approval, but they gain integrity. They may lose followers, but they gain inner quiet. They may lose illusions, but they gain sight. And in the end, this trade-off becomes the foundation of a life that feels real.
This segment was never about being perfect. Rare minds don't seek perfection. They seek wholeness. They aren't superior. They're simply unwilling to betray themselves anymore. And that shift changes everything. They walk away from shallow safety and step into sacred solitude. They stop editing their truth and begin embodying it. They look into the mirror, not to admire or critique, but to finally see. Because rare minds are not defined by their intelligence, their achievements, or even their pain. They are defined by their devotion to something few dare to pursue: psychological truth at all costs. And that truth, once found, becomes the only place they are finally free. In the final chapter of this journey into the rare mind, we arrive at a threshold that few cross willingly. We've spoken of isolation, intuition, shadow, and awakening, but now we face something even more profound: becoming the living embodiment of your personal myth. The world rarely honors the symbol makers while they live. Society does not reward those who step outside the collective story. And yet, rare minds are not here to be rewarded. They are here to fulfill something deeper, a silent vow embedded within the psyche itself. This vow is not loud. It whispers only in moments of stillness, during sleepless nights, or in the aching silences of being misunderstood. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what he didn't say, and what most people miss, is that this privilege comes at a cost. It is in this cost, the loneliness, the rejection, the internal war, that your transformation completes. And if you do not resist, if you allow yourself to dissolve everything you once were, you emerge not as someone improved, but as someone reborn. Let's begin. True individuation always requires a kind of death, the death of the person you pretended to be to gain love, safety, or belonging. This familiar self, constructed over years of subtle performance, becomes the very prison that prevents the rare mind from fully emerging. Rare minds carry within them not just their own thoughts, but archetypal patterns, echoes of the eternal human journey. To become the symbol of your own myth, you must first release the conditioned mask. This death is not external. It's not about changing jobs, locations, or partners. It's the internal severance from all identities formed out of fear. You stop being the overachiever who needed validation. You stop being the helper who feared abandonment. You stop being the performer who sought applause. And when those fall away, a terrifying emptiness appears. This is the sacred void. What makes the rare mind truly rare is their ability to sit inside this sacred void without rushing to fill it. Most people run from it, into distractions, relationships, careers, even spiritual bypassing. But the void is not absence. It is potential. It is the womb of the psyche, where symbolic rebirth begins. Rare minds understand that this stillness is not punishment, but preparation. Silence becomes their mentor. Loneliness becomes their initiation. The sacred void is not empty. It's full of the whispers of the unconscious. It is here that dreams return, archetypes speak, and intuition reorganizes the soul. But staying here requires courage, because this space does not affirm your ego. It dissolves it. As the rare mind dissolves the old self, something unexpected happens. The psyche, freed from the prison of persona, becomes open to deeper forces. Archetypes begin to stir: the seeker, the magician, the outcast, the healer. Each archetype demands embodiment. Each one tests your inner structure. But this stage is dangerous, because without conscious awareness, you can become possessed by an archetype. A rare mind may become obsessed with saving others, the healer, or lost in visions and abstraction, or fall into bitterness, the wounded warrior. Carl Jung called this archetypal possession, when the ego is no longer steering and the archetype hijacks the entire personality.
The rare mind must learn to channel these forces without becoming enslaved by them. To become a symbol means integrating the power of archetypes while remaining rooted in human humility. In the final phase of this journey, a rare mind must make a decision: to live a life of comfort and conformity, or to embody their myth, even if it isolates them. This choice is not symbolic, it is literal. You may lose people. You may lose certainty. You may lose the ability to explain yourself. But what you gain is immeasurable, a life that mirrors the truth of your soul. You become not just someone who knows truth, but someone who is truth. This is the transition from seeker to symbol. You no longer chase meaning, you are meaning. Every word you speak, every boundary you hold, every silence you honor becomes part of the sacred pattern you're weaving. Here's what no one tells you: the myth you embody is not just for you. Rare minds, when fully activated, become symbolic figures for the unconscious of others. Just by existing, they give others permission to question, feel, transform. You are not a guru. You are not a savior. You are a mirror. And in your reflection, others see their own unlived life. This is why rare minds often attract projections: love, hate, envy, awe. People don't see you, they see the parts of themselves they've abandoned. To carry this with grace is the final trial. To become a symbol is to know you will never be fully understood and still continue. To embody your myth is to walk alone but never be lonely. To be rare is not a title, it's a responsibility.
If you've made it to the end of this series, you are likely not here by accident. Something in you resonated, not just intellectually, but emotionally, archetypally. Maybe you've always felt different. Maybe the world has never made sense the way others describe it. Maybe you've spent your life trying to hide your depth just to survive. But now you know, you were never broken. You were rare. And rare things are not meant to be understood. They are meant to be felt. Welcome to your myth. Let's close with a question. Do you think you might be one of these rare minds? Or do you know someone who is? What part of this journey spoke to you the most? Let us know in the comments. Your story, your thoughts, your voice, they matter more than you think. Your insight could be the reflection someone else has been waiting for. We'll be reading everything. Because if you're here, chances are you're not alone anymore.